So, hello everyone, my name is Tom, and yes, I'll be quickly following on from Xerxes' point and talking about some of the global criticisms that that Rodrik's Trilemma, since its conception, has been at the forefront. So, the first ever kind of review, or the most prominent review of Rodrik's Trilemma, was written by Kate Saffin in 2012. Rodrik's Trilemma was published in 2011, so this came only a year after. And Kate Saffin notes that because of, as Liz was saying, it's a static framework, it's not wholly reflective of a universal blueprint for countries to operate globally and economically. She argues in particular that due to the diversity of context and cultures, what works in one nation may not work in another. So the reason we're telling you this, the reason I'm personally starting with this, is because me and Liz as students, we've sat in the exact same seats that you have. We know exactly what it feels like to be learning this kind of static framework, so to speak, and quite frankly, how boring it can be sometimes. So I would like to just continue on with kind of the criticisms of it. So for the developed and mature economies, we already mentioned the United States and their recent turn to protectionism, and we can view that as like a live action example of a country reducing its hyper-globalisation in order to reclaim its national sovereignty. Donald Trump obviously used this as an effective strategy because that's primarily what his supporters wanted. You know, his campaign is run on a very nationalistic slogan, "Make America Great Again," you know? But when introducing these tariffs, they came with their trade-offs. Firstly, I think objectively it would be really easy to say, it was very costly, you know? And perhaps its execution was more inadequate, or it was a more inadequate strategy than necessary, because ultimately it resulted in economic pain, economic uncertainty, and retaliation from other countries without the proper institutional cover. Some of you may be familiar with the offer that Donald Trump put in to buy Greenland from Denmark, to which Denmark promptly responded, "Sure, if you give us California." I think that's a pretty good trade-off. I mean, I'm not entirely sure why the US need more cold, desolate wastelands, but hey, that's just me. So, moving on now to the kind of developing and fragile economies, we're going to be talking about the West African nation of Liberia. So, Liberia was one of the two countries in Africa which didn't fall to colonial power from Europe. Instead, it fell to colonial power from the United States, the other being Ethiopia, which managed to fend off its, I think it was the Italians who were trying to colonize them, but that's besides the point. When you're the United States and you come to a new country and all of a sudden you see, what are the things that this country can produce better than we can? They found palm oil there. Palm oil is an essential ingredient in making a lot of things, such as shampoo, other stuff as well. So they effectively turned Liberia into a palm oil factory. And in doing so, this has resulted to, even today, Liberia, 80% of their exports is palm oil. Now, this is something which you may call an economic dependency, when a nation relies solely on one particular good for the majority of their exports. So, flashback to 2021, John Lewis and partners and other multinationals campaigned for the boycotting of palm oil in their products because of the environmental implication. They did this by having a very cute animation of a monkey swinging around like this little girl's bedroom and saying, you know, "Oh, they're destroying my home because they're cutting down trees for the sake of palm oil." And whilst that is 100% true, what happened as a result was because, as I said, Liberia, 80% of their exports are palm oil. all of a sudden, what happens if there's no demand for palm oil anymore? Their economy crashes. So jobs were lost, businesses couldn't turn a profit anymore, and it had horrendous economic implications, which they're still trying to recover from today. So the company, John Lewis and partners and other multinationals then switched to a more sustainably sourcing agenda of palm oil because of the backlash. But this is an example of how a boycotting can destroy a country with an economic dependency. So why are we talking about this in relation to Rodrik's trilemma? Well, we're doing this because we're looking at the application of it and what it implies when actually applying to, let's say, a developed, mature economy. In the case of the United States, this is one where it was used. You can see live action their shift from hyper-globalisation to national sovereignty, where their emphasis lies. But what was the cost? It cost them a lot of money. We're going to talk a minute about a similar case that happened in Sri Lanka, but we'll get to that when we come to it. And then for the developing and fragile economies, can they really use Rodrik's trilemma in such a way where it's actually effective for them in terms of hyper-globalisation, when a country has an economic dependency on just one good? What can Rodrik's trilemma actually provide for them? Are they really going to be sitting around in boardrooms going, well, if we decrease democracy, what will this lead to? Or are they just going to be going, our economy's crashing before our very eyes? So I want to pose this question to the room. Is Rodrik's trilemma truly a one-size-fits-all framework? Is it actually useful beyond a static environment, or is it just a bit of brain nourishment for economists or those who believe, those whose beliefs line up with yours? Is it just a bit of brain nourishment for economists to sit around a dinner table and discuss hypothetically, or can it actually be used in real-world context? So yes, has anyone got any thoughts on that? That's fair enough. So we'd now like to talk a little bit about sustainability pressures and trilemma. So as global motivations move towards other sources, it intensifies the factors and the drivers of Rodrik's trilemma. So, as written in the slide, sustainability challenges introduce a new constraint on the balance between the three factors: globalisation, sovereignty, and democracy. So, climate governance requires cross-border coordination, limiting unilateral national policy. We're going to talk about, in a second, the new European CSRD. You may want to look ahead in the slides for that, but that's an example of how new climate governance encompasses cross-border coordination rather than just a single unilateral national policy. And yeah, political resistance often emerges when climate rules are perceived to impact things like energy prices, jobs, or national sovereignty. This here you'll see is a tweet from a leader of a country, we won't say which it is, but it reads, "The badly flawed Paris Climate Agreement protects the polluters, hurts the country, and costs a fortune. Not on my watch." These are elected officials who are writing these things. A good source for you guys to watch, if you want a YouTube video to watch after this, is Dale Vince was recently debating Piers Morgan on this kind of topic, and made some very, very interesting points actually. So yeah, that's definitely worth a watch. And just lastly here, obviously inequality increases domestic democratic pressures for redistribution and protection. So a very good example of this is flashback to the late 1950s, early 60s in Guatemala in Central America. So this is after the War of Independence for the Latin and Central American countries. And although colonialism had formally ended on paper, elites still controlled all of the wealth and would keep the people of Guatemala impoverished. So under the democratically elected President Arbenz, he sought to redistribute this land amongst its rightful owners, where it had initially come from, whilst compensating the businesses that were bought there at the time. You may be familiar with the term Banana Republic. This is where that term comes from, because the company, Chiquita Banana, owned pretty much all of Guatemala. And it's kind of strange to think about that a banana company could own a country. But ultimately, President Arbenz, Chiquita Banana rather, they snitched to the CIA in the United States and overthrew President Arbenz in a coup, a CIA-sponsored coup, because of the fear of communism. Quite interesting in and of itself. But that's a good example of how the forced inequality increases domestic democratic pressures for the redistribution and protection. If you guys have got a minute, definitely look that up as well. So moving on, we're now talking about resource limits, things like energy, water, land and minerals. They drive governments to adopt policies that may conflict with global market expectations. Again, I alluded to the example in Sri Lanka, which again we're going to come to in a second. But in short, that was where their produce of tea and rice was essentially cut in half because of sustainability pressures from not only the citizens of Sri Lanka but also kind of globally as well. Again, some of you may be familiar with the concept of Earth Overshoots Day. So this is a foundation that was set up in the 1960s, and it was just the turning point of which the globe, or the people of Earth, started overusing the resources that were available to them basically every year. And at the moment, per year, as of 2024, we use 1.7 amount of Earths in a year that the world can provide. I'm probably explaining it terribly, but you can look it up and you can get an idea. But the point of that is it's been a steady decline since the 1960s, and the world cannot produce the global demand anymore. There is a global market expectation that we have to meet in some way. However, it's not sustainable long term, and you can look at these factors in your own time if you'd like. So these pressures force choices between global cooperation for sustainability, domestic democratic demands, and preserving national sovereignty, which of course are the three factors of Rodrik's trilemma, and sustainability therefore intensifies Rodrik's trilemma, because these are pressures that literally affect the three drivers of the trilemma. So, looking at applying the trilemma to the United States, China or the European Union, we spoke a little bit earlier about how these were used in very legitimate scenarios. However, they may not have been the most effective strategy, or they may not have been executed in the best way. So a country needs to determine its priorities. So which two dimensions dominate out of the trilemma, out of the triangle, and which dimension is restricted. You can see there the terms in which Rodrik coined for what each combination implies. So you need to identify the patterns of trade integration, democratic pressures, and national sovereignty claims. I think this is going to be coming up in the exam. Joseph will talk about the exam right at the end, and he'll go in a bit more detail about how you actually integrate this into the exam question. So again, I just want to ask the room, we've already kind of covered this, but just want to quickly ask the room, fair play if you don't want to answer, but instinctively, those of you who do want to answer, instinctively, what do you think are the two most important drivers of the three Rodrik forces? Just instinctively.
Going.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's not very good. I know it's 9 AM on a Tuesday morning, so I understand. I've been in your guys' shoes before, so it's all good. Yeah. So just a continuation quickly on applying the trilemma to the United States, China, or the EU. You want to take a sustainability angle as well, because as we have just mentioned, sustainability intensifies the forces of Rodrik's trilemma. So, yeah, that is the right slide. There we go. So, how climate pressures, inequality, and/or resource scarcity intensify the trade-off? These are some of the things which you need to be considering in answering for the exam if you choose to pick this question. So, I think, as Joseph will tell you, the best arguments cover both sides of this. And so, do sustainability demands push the country or region towards the following: global cooperation? So, I alluded to this earlier, but the CSRD, which is the new directive that the European Union has just released, asking larger corporations that operate within the European Union to comply legislatively, that's a difficult word, for their sustainability credentials, right? But despite the new legislative compliance in the EU businesses under this new CSRD, there have been recent far-right agendas that have resulted in dramatic cuts to the EU's sustainability reporting and due diligence laws. Oh, by the way, all of the sources are available in the notes of the lecture slides. Yeah, you can access them like that, and they've all been cited. But yeah. So yeah, do sustainability demands push the country more towards that? Again, I talked earlier about the Piers Morgan Dale Vince debate, which was fantastic. And Dale Vince did make the very, very good philosophical point that humanity has effectively used 100 million years worth of fossil fuels that the Earth has developed over this great length of time in just 100 years. So there is really a question of if the speed of changing is really a valid argument. So do sustainability demands push the country or region more towards national control? So can sustainability be integrated effectively without compromising the nation? So now we get to talk about Sri Lanka that I alluded to. Their recent ban on synthetic fertilisers and pesticides in 2021. This ultimately led to an overall 20% decrease in rice and tea sourcing and exports, and that's ultimately led to around $900 million, converted into US dollars, $900 million in losses, and the government then had to issue $200 million in compensation to those farmers, right? And that is where do you draw the line with this? Because ultimately, do the maths. It's over $1 billion worth of expenditure that they did, and 20% decrease in one of their most prominent exports. So there is a question of, is $1 billion? $1 billion. Where do you draw the line? Can a government really afford to spend over $1 billion on reducing its or increasing its sustainability credentials, right? Obviously, there are some environmentalists who will believe that the ends always justify the means, but you need to be a bit careful, obviously. And like we say, in a good essay, we'll be able to explore both dimensions of this. And finally, do sustainability demands push the country or region more towards domestic democratic pressure? That is, of course, the will of the people for the degree of the nation's focus on sustainability. We've seen in recent times an increasing number of climate protesters. And the Falmouth, the Penryn campus, rather, has actually, hosted a few of them. And personally, I think that's great. That's, obviously that's for the individual to decide ultimately. But regardless of what you think, you may not agree or disagree with what they're doing. However, do they have a right to do it? That's the question. I think Joseph has done a fantastic thing this week in allowing me and Xerxes to present to you today. And we are certainly voices of the students, but we are not the voices of the students. So it's important to keep that in mind. I don't want to isolate any of you with perhaps what you may consider my bias or Xerxes' bias. It's ultimately for you to decide, but I think, that's the bottom line, is the best essays and best responses to the exam will kind of encompass both sides of the argument, because that's really what's most important. That's what's causing such contention around the world right now. So that is it for me. I think Joseph is going to explain something to do with the essays, is that right?
Yeah, I'm not going to go into details as you promised them.
Oh, my apologies.